Good evening, and thanks so much for coming. We'll try to start on time, as Mr. MESAROS just said. My name is Phil Williams. I'm the Public Works and Utilities Director. A few introductions. Bertrand House is the city's transportation engineer. Shane Hope, of course, I think you know, as the Director of Development Services. Rob English, sitting next to the windows over there, is the city's engineer. We've got Patrick Doherty is here, also a director here with the city, with a very large portfolio and a really long title, but it's Community Services Director and Economic Development Director. I think I got that right. And we've got two council members here tonight. Daryl Haug, I was going to point out, he's a citizen, but he's kind of a super citizen. He has been working with us in an ad hoc way to develop the strategy for moving forward on addressing parking, which is really the first time in 16 years we've attempted to go out and collect new data on parking. Tom MESAROS, council member over there, and Dave TEITZEL have put a lot of effort into putting a strategy together to reach out to the public, wanting to do that as soon as possible in the process and hear what your thoughts and concerns are. So I'm going to turn this over. Yes. Oh, I missed him. Where is David? I did talk to him. Yeah, David here from the port. And let's see if we've missed anybody else. David's on the board of the Port of Edmonds, so others may come in. But anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Dave TEITZEL. He's going to have some opening remarks on behalf of the City Council, and then we'll go through a really pretty short PowerPoint. We will then ask you to break into groups. You can grab the chair you're sitting in or a different one, and we'll try to huddle around some of these boards, and we'll start writing down what you have to tell us about parking. Dave?
Thank you. Thanks, Phil, and good evening, everybody. I am Dave TEITZEL with City Council, and we appreciate you being here tonight. And I know you're all busy, so it means a lot that you invest in your time tonight to help us. But we've heard you all very clearly that you do expect to have a chance to be heard early in the process as the city starts embarking on new initiatives. And we're going to be talking about parking tonight, primarily downtown parking. So we'll be focusing on that. It's part of our effort, the council and the administration, to reach out to you to make sure that you know what's going on and that we hear you, and that before we formulate a position or strategies, that your input is provided. So tonight we're talking about issues and concerns you have. We're not going to jump to solutions quite yet. We want to make sure we scope the problem, define the issues, and make sure we know what we're talking about as we start embarking on the actual study of how we can enhance the parking we have available for businesses and for citizens here. We know that there's a lot of businesses and citizens who couldn't attend tonight because they've got other obligations. And so the city has set up an online survey, and that survey is available until the 12th. That's next week. And you can take the survey, those of you that are watching on video. If you're not able to attend tonight, provide your input that way. And that input will be considered as we define the next steps here. So we've been publicizing both this meeting tonight and the survey via local media, My Edmonds News, The Beacon. We've publicized it by Facebook, My Edmonds Moms, Instagram, and other sources to make sure the information is out there and people know this is going on, because I think in the past we haven't done a good enough job of reaching out, making sure people knew early on what the city's about. So hopefully we can use that as a launching point for more of those sorts of efforts in the future. That's very important. Again, we want to hear you tonight. Let's hear about any concerns you have, problems you see about parking, either from a business standpoint or a citizen standpoint or a visitor standpoint. And let's talk about that and define that, the scope of the problem that way, and get started in it. So with that, I'll turn it back to Phil, and he'll talk more about the detail of what happens the rest of the evening. And again, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm tempted to... reviewing the audience here while I was waiting. There's quite a few council candidates here tonight too. You might want to introduce yourself to them. I'm sure they'll be interested. We are in the middle of election season, and there's a lot of turnover taking place this year. So familiarize yourself with the candidates and ask them what they think about parking as well. I think that'd be good. Anyway, let's... So the agenda, I think we just talked about it. Some opening remarks from our city council. Project, we'll jump into a project description as we see it now. Your comments and your input and all of the other input we will get on the other outreach efforts we're making online and so forth will shape the scope of this study we're talking about doing, help shape that scope. and we'll talk about that project description. We'll go to small group discussions, as I mentioned, with about 40 people, maybe 45 at this point in time. I think that'll work out really well. We'll have maybe 10 or so at each station, or even fewer, so everybody's going to get a chance to tell us what they think, and don't be shy. Then, after that time has passed and we've written all that down, we'll get back together and each group can report out sort of what the focus was on their conversations and add to what the previous group said and so forth. And then we'll talk about what the next steps will be in the process. And Tom MESAROS, I think, is going to give some closing comments after the session at the very end. Any questions about the format or the process? All right. So the last downtown parking study was completed in 2003. That's the one I mentioned 19 years ago, or 16 years ago, excuse me. Scope of work as we see it, there'll be some basic pieces that we just have to do. Things have changed in Edmonds in the last 16 years. The city's certainly picked up a lot of intensity and vibrancy in the downtown. That has impacts, positive and negative, but in this case it does affect parking and the parking demand, the demand for parking. So we will seek public input. We'll be collecting data. I'll show you a picture in a minute. We're working with a consultant called Framework that we are negotiating a contract with. We haven't signed one with them yet because we haven't finalized the scope of work until after this outreach process. And they will begin to collect data, and we want to do it right away while we're still in the good weather portion of the year. Collecting parking data in the wintertime wouldn't be that informative. That's really not when we have our acute parking issues in the winter. So we're trying to catch this last part of August and through the first part of September before things really begin to change. We will have an additional meeting, at least one, after we collect that data, so you can review the data with us and see what you think of it, what it tells us. You'll look at how many, we'll inventory how many spaces are available out there that are public parking on the street. We'll even look on the private property and count the number of spaces that are available in lots, and then look at usage data. How many of those spaces are used? What time of day? What days of the week? To try to develop a pattern so that if there are problems out there, we can identify what they are with your help. And at that point, we'll go back to the City Council, as it says here, and take that contract for approval, issue a notice to proceed, and get started on the study. So, roughly speaking, I mean, we're interested in anything you have to say tonight, anywhere in Edmonds, about parking. Don't be shy. In particular, we do have a focus on this general area. If you wanted to think of it like Casper's or something on the north, 9th maybe on the east, and Pine Street on the south. But if you have other thoughts about parking throughout Edmonds, don't be shy mentioning them. We can't really, at this point in time, go out and do a parking study for every bit of Edmonds. The resources necessary to do that would be just huge. So we're trying to figure out where to focus, and you're going to help us do that. One thing we came up with, normally these parking studies are done by the consultant. They bring about half a dozen workers into town, and they have tablets, and they just start walking the streets and counting cars, going back later, counting them again, seeing if they moved, figuring out how much turnover we're getting. It's a physical process, kind of old school, frankly. We do have a couple of drones here in the city, and we've been working with a consultant to do this more cost effectively. So I think we're going to try flying the drone around town, and then you can stitch all those individual pictures together in software, let them just sit at a desk and count the cars at that hour of the day, on that day of the week, on that day of the month, and then you can compare that data after the fact. This is what it looks like when you zoom in. This is not, probably seems creepy. We're not looking at anybody's backyard. We're not, looking for anything other than parked cars. And a lot of them might be in garages, and that's not of our interest. But so when we break out into group discussions, you can talk about anything you want. no restrictions. If it slows down at all, we'll ask one or more of these questions just to see if we can get the conversation going again. Things like, what is your main reason when you come to downtown or the downtown area, anywhere there? What brings you there if you're coming from outside that area? How frequently do you come downtown? And do you always drive? Do you always drive, or do you use other methods of transportation as well? Do you walk into town? Do you bicycle? Do you take a ride-sharing program or whatever that might be? Taxi cabs? Another question, what personal goals? How do you feel personally? What would be your goal for this parking study if you could tell us what that goal is? Based on the problems or the good things that you've seen out there that you think work. As you think about your ability to access downtown amenities, what is your current experience and how could that experience be improved? What irritates you? And how badly does it irritate you? And yeah, tell us about that. For business owners, getting away from maybe the resident side for just a minute, for those of you that are owning property downtown, running a business, what issues and concerns do you have regarding your patrons or customers being able to access your business? And for the residents, again, what concerns do you have about getting to a particular downtown business? So those are some things to think about when we break into the small group discussions. The next steps when we get done here, I mentioned that the City Council Subcommittee, the Parks and Public Works Committee, next week in fact, will get the benefit of the information you give us tonight and look at that scope of work that I talked about and tweak it as necessary and hopefully be able to recommend that contract to the City Council the following week on the next meeting on a Tuesday night and see if we can get that contract approved and get the consultant started. The online survey, as was mentioned, please fill that out. I think, Patrick, what's the latest count? Okay, 450 people have already accessed the survey and answered a few questions, and we've got a laptop or an iPad with a keyboard at least over there. If you want to do that tonight, it'd only take you about 5 minutes to go through it. I would, unless you have a lot to say, it could be 10 minutes. But and then we'll schedule another public meeting in September once we have the data collected. That is pretty much it. So from a presentation standpoint, now we want to break into groups, and let's see how we might want to do that.
There's always, in this country,
Okay, we'll get started with my group, and Phil helped us with this as well. We had a lot of great ideas, and generally the folks felt that the scope we talked about on the map was pretty much okay, although it depends on the event and the time of year. That scope could possibly vary. For example, we see during the 4th of July there's a big surge of parking up near Civic Field and all the way up to Holy Rosary up in that direction, so it kind of bulbs out that way, so we'll be sensitive to that. There's definitely a supply issue, a supply and demand. There's more demand than supply for parking, so we need to address that. We're having more and more attractions coming online, which will attract more people down here at Edmonds, so that's certainly an issue. It's an issue both for the waterfront and downtown. Clearly, we've got the new waterfront center coming online. That's going to create more people into town. We need to address that some way. So their point was made, there's a lot more housing coming online here in the area, not just in Edmonds, but in Linwood, Mount Lake Terrace, and those areas, up to 6,000 to 7,000 more residential units. A lot of those folks have been wanting to come to our city to enjoy the amenities down here. That'll create more demand for parking. Let's see. They said, don't assume winter parking is less. Phil, that was your point. Phil, let's tag team. Have you talked to the items that you wrote down here?
Well, one comment was don't forget about the winter. You get Christmas shopping. That's a huge season for the businesses downtown, and I didn't mean to give the impression that we were. I think historically the parking demand is a little heavier in the nice weather, but certainly you've got to look at it on a year-round basis. That was a good point. There was a comment about what was felt to be the punitive nature of the parking tickets that are issued. We've put quite an emphasis, frankly, on that the last couple of 3 years because we just didn't have enough hours available for parking enforcement. That's increased, and the number of tickets have increased, which has increased the circulation on parking spaces. On the other hand, there's a downside to that. It irritates people, especially if they're visitors or even if they're here and they missed it by a few minutes and they have to pay that. It doesn't leave a good taste in your mouth if you're downtown shopping. Employee parking locations was something that was brought up that we honestly need to resolve that problem. I don't think the employee parking permit, I think the system is okay, but it has some problems with it. They're probably overprescribed, but something needs to be done to more formally address the need for our businesses to have places for their employees to park. Using churches for or faith organizations, a lot of them have sizable parking lots fairly close to downtown, and maybe that'd be a decent spot to try to work an arrangement with them for employee parking during the week. A need for more handicap spaces. We do our best to keep at least the number of handicap spaces that are required by the Americans with Disability Act in our downtown, but there was a suggestion that more would be better. There were a lot of suggestions on places we could build structured parking. What about over here? Could you put a two-story parking garage there, maybe one over here, one over there? And those are all possibilities if one has the funding to do that, I suppose. Although some of the neighborhoods in which they would be located, those would be interesting zoning and land use issues to try to resolve. But certainly structured parking could be part of the problem, and they didn't want us to ignore that. So the trolley, good. That was the consensus. We really ought to continue to explore that. It's a good idea, could be helpful. It isn't necessarily prohibitively expensive in the overall scheme of things, so continue looking at that. Flex spaces in general, I put churches up there, but there may be other types of organizations that use their parking certain times during the week and not others, and if you can figure out a way to take advantage of that, make it good for the property owner as well as for the people needing parking, that might be a good idea. Parking for ADUs, there was a concern that the city has an emphasis, and we do, to try to increase housing densities and also make more affordable housing, and one way to do that is through accessory dwelling units. There are some, again, faith organizations that have done that on their own property, but also on private property if you have the room and want to sponsor an ADU. The concern was those might exacerbate parking if there is no parking available for it. And I think that's all we had, wasn't it?
Yep.
Oh, the cost for residential permits. There was a complaint that nobody should have to pay for a residential parking permit.
That's the one. Good, thank you. So we had a lively group in the easy chairs over in the Fortner room. That was nice to have, and you're going to have to turn. Good. So our first question was, why do you come downtown? And we come downtown to do our banking. We come for city meetings, as all of you just did this evening. Post office, restaurants, bars was mentioned many times. So just want to make that clear. We need to be transparent in understanding why we come downtown. We come to work. We come to visit family. We come to the library, walking, visiting parks. We come for the ferry. We come for trains. We come mornings, evenings, and afternoons. So we, all kinds of times. Do we come? Some come every day. Some come 4 or 5 times a week. Some do 50-50. Some walk, some ride. And then some always take their car because they're outside the downtown core. And then some do take their bike and some Uber. But there's, it's just a variety of ways that we come to downtown. So question 2. Yeah, just drop it. Good. Here, if you can grab the, oh, good. She's done this before. Question 2 was, what are some things we need to do here to come downtown? And public transportation was mentioned. The trolley was mentioned, and one of the facts around that, it doesn't go far enough. So if you live at Westgate, you don't get the trolley. If you live at Roundabout, you don't get the trolley. So, can we broaden that out so that people that are at least, close to the downtown core would be able to get it? Data on parking turnover, we need to have that. We need to have a finite, what is the actual finite number of parking spaces, and so that we know what we're working with. And then one of our members actually did their own parking study, and so we're way ahead of the game. They walked around and counted 311 parking spaces. cars, 311 cars. Of those cars that were parked, 173 had passes, employee passes. They reminded us that Daryl Howe told us that we had 531 passes for employees in the city and 410 residential passes. So, the passes are taking up more spaces. And so, the rest of us have to compete with that. And then the comment about winter parking is crucial, because in the winter, people want to park even closer to those businesses because they don't want to be in the rain. And so winter might even make parking harder, as people just want to get within a small section of that. Thank you. You're good. So, yeah. So, and she gets paid as much as Vanna. So, I better get close to the microphone. Alternative, so question 3, alternative transportation is crucial. We need more parking available with sound transit. So people don't realize that the last train to get to Edmonds arrives about 6:05. And so, people get off the train, they take those cars that are parked in sound transit down by the area, and so those lots then sit empty. But if you want to go, eat at a restaurant, there's an empty parking lot there, but you feel you can't use it because it's sound transit parking. But there are no more trains after that hour of the day. We have to increase capacity, and we have to allow for growth. Even though our city may not grow as fast, as was mentioned earlier, the surrounding area is growing. Some people advocated for increased parking fees. Some people advocated for more ability to improve walking around our city. We need loading zones so people can let people off, and then commercial vehicles can park and do business and deliver things to businesses. There should be, some people talked about having a commercial parking requirement for new commercial buildings in downtown Edmonds. Right now there is that requirement. And then we do have to solve the retail problem, because if people can't park when they want to do retail in downtown Edmonds, they're going to stop coming, and so that's going to be a problem. So we have to solve that. All right, last one. People who live here may come back another day. So, if you're coming down, you can't find a place to park, well, you live here, so you'll come back another day and you'll do that. But people from out of town will they'll search and they'll stay because they made a decision to come to Edmonds for the day. And so they may want to pay for parking. They'll go to a destination lot where others may not. And then someone asked the question, are tickets really a solution? Do we want to increase ticket fees? And does that really motivate people? And then there should be a place for people to park all day. So if you do want to spend the day, if you arrive here and you got a 3-hour window, to park, then what do you do after 3 hours? And so there should be a place where you do that. And then more public transportation. So that was our group. Anybody else? Who's up? Daryl?
Thanks for writing small. It's easy to read. There's lack of sufficient disability parking. One correction on the number of employee parking permits. It's 725 and growing per year, and it's residential permits are 834. So the numbers are higher than what Tom reported. Recommended to change from 3-hour zones to something less than that. And another very good information is, what did the 2003 study show? When can we learn about it? And what will we learn differently on this study? What about the people who park 24 hours or 72 hours in neighborhoods? The ferry traffic type situation. The library parking lot is frequently full. Is that being managed in any way in our whole parking inventory? Will the 3-hour zones expand upward away from the zoning today? When will that happen? What will cause those 3-hour zones to expand into further neighborhoods? Can the city lease otherwise underutilized space and make them available and publicize it in some way for the public to utilize? All-day parking, that was mentioned by others. Expand the hash mark practice, clearly delineating space around. My personal idea is, in the bars, when they close, you can just have a can of paint, and when you go out to your car, just paint a line around where your car is, and then the next person can park there. So, but Phil Williams doesn't want to do it that way. He wants to measure. in the area of like 7th and Alder, we're putting in these nice attractive planter boxes, which when we do put those in, we take up parking space often to accomplish that. So there's trade-off issues. The study should definitely anticipate inbound future growth from visitors and our own growth of our own people. We should look to see what other communities have done and are doing who have similar problems, that we may not have to reinvent the wheel. We can kind of gather what has been done elsewhere and see if we can gain something from that. We need to develop better information about when our businesses are busy, when are they not, and maybe in some way help our public understand that so they know when to come here based on availability of a space. Remote locations and shuttle services for employees has been mentioned, as well as those same remote locations for visitors to come and then shuttle to wherever they may want to go. The concept of possible paid parking on the street with the first hour to be free or something like that, but there's pros and cons as it relates to business, both negative and positive. Have some form of a continuous people mover system. The trolley is nice, but maybe some other strategies that could be employed. The civic field parking concerns came up as to, that's going to be a different kind of a thing. What's going to happen with the increased demand in that area? The Union Oil location, build a park and ride shuttle type service out of there. And then one of the ones that came up was how would moving the ferry dock impact parking in downtown? Moving it from its current location to some other location. So that's kind of what we came up with. So I have some paint, by the way, when we leave.
Well, at this point, I'm not sure because there's a whole lot new, but I'll just quickly go through and they're not as long. So we want to make sure that, and we really focused on what the study should consider or include. That was kind of really focused. So include the notion of paid parking, is that good or bad? Adding parking. We've got to study what Sound Transit's plans are because they have the money to add some parking to, obviously accommodate commuting, but how does that relate to the port? How does that relate to the city? Make sure to consider future growth, not just in the city, but around us. Explore all the permitting options. We've heard a lot about that with the detail, but really explore that as part of the study. Address the ferry parking. Consider the future attractions, not just Civic Park, but the Waterfront Center and other things we know are coming that are going to change. So it's not just a snapshot right now, but recognizing what we know. We don't have a crystal ball forever, but what we know about is coming in the future. Consider to continue to look at parking options for Civic Park, especially how around the park there could be a change in the street parking. Maybe there's angle parking, maybe there's other parking that can just at least increase what's there in the existing rights of way. Options for port parking need to be considered. Consider adding the tick marking. We've heard that several times. Off-site parking. We heard that satellite parking with shuttle services. Private parking partnerships, and I have a little news about that. I'll play in a moment. So continue to explore those partnerships. Again, the library. People have commented about what's happening there. How's that being used? Make sure that's studied and included. The parking hours. That was just the placeholder for. Is it 3? Is it 2? Is it 1? Is there a sort of schedule of them, like the closest point around the fountain, it's 1, and then it's 2, and then it's 3, and it's, who knows. Make sure that our demographics of our population are considered, the trends that we see in demographics, the changes in age, the changes in behavior of the different age cohorts. Study the parking during major events. Add parking, consider adding parking at or around the Francis Anderson Center playfield, and make sure to evaluate, I'm not sure I've heard this yet, so this might be the one new one. Evaluate our parking requirements in the code for new development. And then add maybe an app service that helps you understand where parking is. And the one thing I wanted to add, because it was related to the private parking partnership idea, was that your Downtown Edmonds Alliance has been working on that issue. And here's just a very small handful of handouts of the parking map for Downtown Edmonds that shows 4 bank parking lots that now offer free after hours in the evening and weekend parking. That's about 100, more than 100 new spaces. So that's a cool thing, and they are interested in continuing to do that. And this study may also consider those kinds of partnerships to add, without building anything new, just maximizing the utility and efficiency of the parking resource that we currently have.
Patrick, is that on the edge?
This is on their website, and I can just hand you this as you want. Yeah, and you have a question about?
I have a question about that.
Mhm.
That's great, but do people that are coming to town to visit, to go to the beach for the day,
Yeah.
do they know that? Or how would they know that they could park there?
Right.
They're
So-
not familiar with downtown.
So there are signs, there's a uniform sign with a P, and it says after-hours parking. So it is not for the day, it's after hours. So after the bank closes,
Well, I mean, like Sundays.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's
So if anybody wants these, I'll leave them in the back there.
So just one housekeeping item, if you haven't signed in, because I did check, there's only 26 people signed in and I counted you, and there's more than that here. So make sure you sign in, give us your email address so we can follow up with you on this topic as we go forward with the study, and you'll get notices of future meetings and comment opportunities. And I also promised several people we'd have a few minutes here if you had a burning question to ask about anything related to parking. Tony?
Well, the public-private option and how you might finance, say, a given lot. If there was a lot that would be appropriate to build a structure on, how might that be financed? You know, do you go for a grant with the feds, or is there other money available? I think the notion of building a garage and then charging to park there is not going to be a real popular option. So is there ways that we could somehow put a structure up that, you know, works with I mean, most landowners with dirt downtown are not interested in building a garage that doesn't bring in revenue. So how do you grapple with that question? You know, that's,
Ever so carefully.
I was just curious if you're actually expecting an answer to that question. But, I mean, obviously, we had a little chat in our group about just the cost of structured parking at, let's say, at least $50,000 a space, and that probably doesn't count the dirt. So if you're trying to buy something in the center of a busy downtown, the property's worth a lot, but then trying to, you know, get 100 spaces in a two-story garage at $50,000 a piece, $5 million, could be $60,000 a space. And, you know, like Patrick was just saying, we added 100 spaces for virtually nothing. And I think we're wanting to take advantage of the creative ideas first, the low-hanging fruit, but if we get to the point where we're serious about creating structured parking, I think those are perfectly legitimate questions. These things do get built, and they're funded in a variety of different ways, and they're probably monetized in a variety of different ways too. Whether you pay for the parking or you don't, somebody's paying for that parking, and it's just a question of how you do that. I don't have any specific suggestions on that, but I know it's a tough thing. It's just really expensive. And any other questions? Yeah.
I did a brief purview on the comprehensive plan, and as extensive as it is, I know I missed a whole lot. But my question is that it's still dated 2017, and under the Department of Public Works, it's broken down into the various departments and responsibilities and goals, etc. It included a 2015 transportation, what I would call a sketch by a private consultant. And I'm kind of wondering if we are hiring what we call the parking consultant, is there going to be an interface between our own departments and the knowledge that we've gained over the years? I mean, we've got the transportation guys that don't have anything to do apparently with that's traffic, but not parking. And I think that there's so many interrelated things here that, in my uneducated opinion, we're putting too much emphasis on outside study people. And we need to coordinate that and resolve. I mean, I would think that for 91 grand, hire a new guy and have an in-house capability that's in the payroll, and you can count on it.
Well, where's Bertrand? Transportation engineer, to the extent, and if and when the city gets involved in parking, and we do have staff that will work on those kinds of issues. And the transportation plan didn't specifically deal with parking. We chose to do that later, and now it's later, and we're looking at hiring a different consultant. That consultant was more specialized in, you know, vehicles and so forth rather than the parking of them. this particular consultant that we've selected has that expertise. And I got asked this question twice tonight about, are you going to look at what other people do and where they've been successful and how have they done it, and why not learn from other people's mistakes? And that's absolutely right on, and that's what a consultant like this that is working for other communities, has worked for them for a long time, can tell you what worked, what didn't work, rather than us trying to kind of cowboy it up as we go along. It's not like we don't know anything about it, but I think it, honestly, if you're looking at, say, millions of dollars in investments in parking, if that's really what people decide they want to do, spending $91,000 to make sure you get the right concept and idea up front, I think probably is a good idea. And I'm not even saying it's $91,000. I don't know what it's going to end up being, but I get your point, and I want you to know that the 2015 Comprehensive Transportation Plan will certainly be looked at in a strong reference document for both the staff involved in this effort as well as the consultant. You bet. Any other questions? Yes.
Is the city open to using some of their public property to build like a boutique garage that's economically feasible in the realm of reality?
I'm the hired help here. I just want to point that out. That is a policy question, so.
Since I have to.
Because we've just issued $3 million in bonds to complete the city
Sure.
field.
So here's my quick answer. My quick answer is that's a question that needs to be answered. You know, and so as one, you know, there's 7 on the city council. I speak for one person. I speak for me, and it is a question that needs to be answered. I can't speak for the whole city council, but it is a question that has to be answered. And we're not at the point where we're going to make that answer tonight, nor even speculate on what that answer might be.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed every time a parking garage comes up, it's a knee-jerk reaction that you can't spend 20, 30 million, 50,000 installed. Can we maybe, it's not just killing it the town. It's
Sure.
Can you go on the next survey?
But
Just choose for it?
we'll see. You know, it's a question that has to be answered.
My last question, who created the survey that was issued to the public? Who defined the question?
Staff created that survey. So there was a,
Next survey should be more actually created by the people.
sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yes.
Thanks.
I just wanted to bring up one thing. Some of you might know that Sound Transit is also doing some study work on what to do for increasing accessibility to the Sounder station, and that is a big issue. They'll probably be having an open house on that in October, so that'll be interesting too.
Any other really burning questions that we want to say before I say some closing comments here? So the only thing I want to say, 2 things. First, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving your input. Thank you for offering your ideas and giving us more questions that we have to find answers to. So, and that leads me to my second comment. This is the beginning. It is not the end. So we have a long way to go to get to the end. We're going to get more information. We're going to get more input. We're going to have more surveys. And we want input from citizens on our surveys. And so that's why you're here, so we can get that kind of input and move that forward.
I was going to say, you guys are in on the ground floor here. I mean, there's 40,000 people in town and there's 40 of you here. So stay involved. You can have influence on this process. You can give the knowledge or the questions you have to your neighbors and get them energized and interested in the topic. Really appreciate your help on that.
And if you have a...
Oops, sorry.
Oh.
Survey's open through Monday. So
Monday.
As you just said, let your friends, neighbors, relatives,
Yep.
shopkeepers, anybody you interact with know about the survey, because there's a lot of open-ended parts of the survey where you can write anything you want. It's not just structured questions.
And if you do have a question that you feel is not getting answered, you know, this is over the next 3 months is your time to make sure that question gets addressed. So I'll challenge you to do that part of it as well. So thank you for coming. Have a good night.